So hello, today I'm at St Mary the Virgin Church in Stebbing in Essex, and I'd like to talk to you about the history of the church and the village. So Stebbing is a village in Essex. It's 4 miles from Great Dunmow and it's 15 miles from Bishop Stortford, surrounded by glorious Essex countryside. The village and the church is perched upon a hill at 77 metres or 253 feet above sea level, and we'll see that later. The population is around 1,440. Now we're currently in one of the small areas around Stebbing, which is called Stebbing Green. Now just walking through Stebbing, you know you're in a very old part of Essex, with at least 50 buildings dating from at least 300 years apiece. Stebbing has many variations to its name. It was once called Stebbing, Stebbings, Stebbingham and Steubing. The actual meaning of the name is a meadow or pasture. Now Stebbing's history is very long. Most likely an Iron Age or Bronze Age settlement was here. We do know, however, that the Romans were here. In 1988, a 2nd century Roman malt house was discovered and remains of a villa in Stebbing Green, where I stand right now. And in front of us looks like the original village pond. Which looks like it's dried up from the heat wave. Now 19 coins were found from the time of Emperor Hadrian, around 117 AD to the 4th century. And we also know that a villa was advanced right here with underfloor heating. The main Roman marching route passed close by, following today's A120. It's most fascinating. Now if we turn around, the A120 is just a short distance up this road here. Now during the Saxon period, the Thane, Siward, was the overlord of Stebbing. Historians believed Siward was a Norse Viking or Saxon. He held 21 manors in 8 counties before the Norman invasion. And by 1069, Siward had joined the Danes to attack William the Conqueror in the north of England. And so by 1071, Siward, along with Bishop Ethelwine and several hundred soldiers, would land at Ely Island in Cambridgeshire, where the cathedral stands today. Siward would be imprisoned for the next 16 years. His lands, including Stebbing, would pass on to the powerful Norman Henry de Ferrers, and he would become William's administrator and own an impressive 210 manors. Now when William the Conqueror's end came, he would release Siward from prison. It's said that Siward would become a Byzantine mercenary in Constantinople, today's Turkey, fighting in today's Ukraine, the Black Sea area. Now during the Norman occupation, Stebbing was a very large community indeed, of 104 households. The land had 2 manors here, Henry de Ferrers acted as the tenant-in-chief and lord, having many plough teams, pigs and cattle. Unusually, I read that he had a priest in 1086. Now, Ranulph de Peveril was the second tenant-in-chief and lord. His lands included 2 mills, 17 plough teams and 2 beehives, many pigs and sheep. Now, Ranulph actually had the greater lands, but the de Ferrers were more powerful because they owned Stebbing's Hall. Now, Ranulph would marry Maud, daughter of Emgeric, the Saxon noblewoman, who established St Martin le Grand in London. And it is believed that Ranulph was the illegitimate son of William the Conqueror, whom he followed into battle at Hastings in 1066. It seems that William gave the very best manners to those that served him well, and Stebbing was much prized. Now, the Peveril offspring would become William of Hatfield Peveril and their other son Payne, the standard bearer in the Crusades of the Holy Lands. Now, looking at the manners of Stebbing, interesting characters would emerge. We have Sir Edward Grey, one of the surveyors of the Domesday Book. We have Robert de Ferrers, Earl of Derby, buried wrapped in an ox skin in 1162. Now, William Ferrers accompanied Richard Lionheart to the Holy Land, buried at the siege of Acre in 1191. We've got Robert Ferrers. He joined the barons against King Henry III, and he was actually taken prisoner. For 3 years, his lands returned after paying a massive fee. Now, Henry de Ferrers of 1338 obtained a charter for a market here every Monday at Stebbing's Manor and a fair on the eve of St Peter St Paul. We also have a Sir John Grey of 1457. He was slain at battle in Wakefield. Now, Henry Grey of 1554 would be the father to Lady Grange, known as the 9 Days Queen, and both were sadly beheaded. Now, Henry's severed head is believed to have been hidden by his widow to prevent it being placed on a spike on London's bridge. It is now kept in St Botolph's crypt in London. Now, before he died, Henry Grey sold Stebbing's Manor to Sir Richard Southwell of Danbury in Essex, who was the treasurer of the walls and keeper of the armoury of the Tower of London. It was Sir Richard who sold the manor on to King Henry III. Eventually, the Capel family, Earls of Essex, would own the hall until the 20th century. A further hall here was called Porter's Hall of today, off the site of the ancient Saxon manor of Ranulph de Peveril. Now, John de Stebbing owned the manor during the reign of King John, around 1200. Now, Henry and John Porter would go on to own this manor. and this is where it gets its name from today. Now, by 1555 it was owned by Sir Giles Capel in the reign of Queen Mary. Now, Sir Giles Capel would challenge knights in jousting at tournaments held at the Field of Cloth of Gold between England and France in Calais in 1520. St Giles would represent King Henry VIII himself. His armour survives today. It is said to be one of the finest in the world. But in 1866 the helmet was laying on top of a stonemason's rubble in Bocking in Essex. Now, once the helmet hung over the Capel's tomb, a young artist, Edith Coulthard, would offer the mason 10 shillings and years later would give the helmet as a gift to an armour historian. Sir Giles himself was born in the small village of Rain, only 3 miles from here. Now, the constable recorded that in 1583, "We do presente Margaret Haydeen of Stebbing upon a common crime of witchcraft." And they were his words. And I think you will stand little chance of proving your innocence in 1583. Now, the constable also noted that a Richard Handler, whose landlord do the suffer diverse abuses in the house, as unlawful games, cards and dice, and extraordinary drinking, provoking diverse quarrels. Excuse me that accent there. And in 1598 we got John Cook of Stebbing, who entered Thompson's hencroft and killed 2 hens. A lot of good folk lived here around this time, including Robert Fuller and John Polly of 1588, for they gave their cottages and gardens, now called rose gardens, for the use of 2 poor families. And I love that. Now, in 1665 the Battle of Colchester took place, and 2 local residents who took part, they received injuries fighting for the king, and they would receive a pension for their loyalty. In the year of 1655, a James Parnell, a Quaker missionary, would leave Cambridgeshire and preach in North Essex. During June of 1665, Parnell would preach right here in Stebbing, most likely where we stand now. And then he went on to Felsted and Halstead and Witham, and by July, Parnell, the young street preacher, would make his final appearance in nearby Coggleshaw. In this time, Bishop Boner of London would burn 2 religious martyrs in Coggleshaw. Parnell would be swiftly imprisoned in Colchester's castle, ending his time after falling from a rope in the dungeon. His last words to his friends: "I have seen great things." Now, James Parnell inspired the building of Stebbing's Friends Meeting House, which we're looking at right now. It was built in 1674. The land was purchased here 2 years earlier, and this is in fact the earliest Quaker meeting house in Essex. It would close in 1884. Today, Stebbing's Parish Council conducts meetings here, and after 348 years, It's still a meeting house of sorts. It's most impressive. And I did notice the ladies here looks like they're conducting their Tai Chi lesson inside right now. If we look above the door, we can actually see that the date it was built. This is a rear view of the old building, and you can see a little bench at the back so you can have a rest. And Stebbing, like many in Essex village, had many an inn, and in 1900 I read that 9 licensed pubs existed here. Today the village is served by the King's Head, which sits dead centre to the village. And if we spin around, King's Head is there. The King's Head is a timber-framed 16th century building. Now the Lucy family would be landlords here for over 100 years. And then the Walter, the Wilsons and the Charters. And I could find no history other than that. Now we have the White Hart, another centrally located pub in the village, also from the 17th century. I found a farm with the same name here. Now the name Hart was from King Richard II's coat of arms, a white stag known as a hart. And if you look, you can notice the king's crown. Now the broken chains are from another English folklore, Herne the Hunter. Now Herne would ride through the great forests of Essex, rattling chains and wearing antlers. Now the Red lying in front of us of Stebbing, an old inn from the 16th century. Today it's a private residence. I like how the owner has honoured this old building's past by keeping the sign. You can imagine the coach and wagon pulling up here as the sun sets, bags unloaded off the roof. The old pub is at Church End and was closed in 1972 following a fire. Now the timber frame survived, and it was discovered it was originally painted green. And interesting, the Lucy family also were landlords here in the 1700s. I read that in 1880 the village accounts showed that money was put aside for any pauper willing to emigrate to Australia. Can you imagine the interest today? Now, 1880 was an interesting year for Australians. The most famous outlaw, Ned Kelly, was captured and hanged. Also, the judge at the trial, he himself died 12 days later after Ned. And here we have a pub from the past, the Green Man Inn, another 17th century timber frame building, closed in 1967. Now a private residence, another name of the English folklore. The Green Man is a symbol of rebirth, and you'll find faces of the Green Man carved into our churches from England and across Europe. Again, originally from the Celtic and Saxon pagan ancestors. you notice this railway track, narrow gauge and broad gauge. Now this brings me back to my years on the railways. So now we're entering Stebbing Park, and there's something very interesting in here. So now we stand in Stebbings Park, and a moat castle, which is in good condition, so I've been told, complete with the original ditch, and it's at 51 feet high, and once had a battlement on top. It's not known who built this, but it's likely the Ferrers family from the 11th to the 13th centuries were responsible. It's only about half a mile from the church. And this is the ditch, and the actual mound sort of goes up, I guess like this. It's hard to make it out behind that big tree. As you walk through Stebbings town or village, I've noticed this village store. It's unusual and it's run entirely by volunteers. It was opened in 2013. Today's shop focuses on quality goods at a fair price. It states all its profits are ploughed back into improving the shop and other community societies. Now Stebbing has a very old bowling green. It's been continuously used for the last 118 years. And I read they're always looking for new members. Now, during World War II, Stebbing itself would have been awash with American airmen and engineers. For just 2 miles away was built Andrews Airfield. It's a US base. It's built in 1942 in nearby Great Sailing. Over 800 servicemen were stationed there. And on my reckoning, it would take about 20 minutes to walk to the Stebbing pubs here. They would go on to lead missions to all over Europe. Later the Polish RAF squadrons would be here. So now we stand in front of St Mary the Virgin Church. In 1181, William de Ferrers, Earl of Derby, gave Stebbings Church to the Knights Hospitaliers, where it remained under their power until 1540. Today's church is one of the best examples of mid-14th century church in the whole of England. And the Reverend Lindsay of this village dated the structure to be around 1324. The walls are of flint rubble, dressings are of shelly oolite and clunch. Now shelly oolite is a limestone of small stones stuck together by lime mud from the shallow seafloor. Now the West Tower is built between 1324 and 1360. It measures 12 feet by 11 feet. Now it's built in 3 stages with an embattled parapet, and on top we've got grotesque gargoyles and a small timber spire. And if we look up on the south side of the west tower, you can just see blocked up window and brick and buttress in brick. It gives you an idea of the scale. So between these two buttresses, if we look straight up, now if we look at the south aisle, which is attached to the tower, you can see the gargoyles. So now we should walk up from Stebbing itself, and this would be the west side. We're going to enter through the south porch. So originally built around 1360, was much altered in the 16th century when the walls were raised using fine Tudor brick. And you can see the extension quite clear. Now, one theory with why the bricks are in the centre of this window is to stop people climbing through. So let's go inside and have a look. You can see the original drip tray there, and much graffiti. Now, if you look at the stone grooves in front of us, there's two theories exist to their purpose. One was for sharpening arrows or knives, and the other was for medicine. So in 1363, Edward III ordered that every man practice archery at the butts every Sunday. Now, some churches actually held archery practice on the grounds, but most would have been in the green on the butts. And it may be that the archers honed their very arrowheads on this holy stone, perhaps. Now, the second theory is that by removing the stone dust, it would be removed by pilgrims and locals for its belief in curing ailments to consume it. So you could mix it with wine, water, oil, just about any liquid. Now, the practice was brought over by the Knights Hospitaliers from the Crusades. So we can see, if we look here, we've got some indentations where it's been removed. And if we follow it across, what I find interesting as you walk in, you've got a medieval piece of stonework used as a doorstop. Amazing. If we just go behind here, you can see where it continues. See all these grooves. Now if we have a look on the other side, it's more or less similar. You see some old graffiti. And this window is a different style. And just behind the door we've got the original area where worshippers would be able to bless and use the holy water. And then we're faced with Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth's Book of Condolence inside. And if we just have a look behind, we can see just how much alteration's taken place. This church has certainly been through the wars. There's some more graffiti here. So let's go into the church itself. I'll take my cap off and we shall enter. So now we're facing the south aisle. It was built around 1360 or possibly before. It's 10 feet wide. It's got fine carved piers, which we'll have a look at a bit later. And it's got carvings above. There's no expense spared. And if we go back, you've got the visitor's book and information for the church. And we've got the condolence book for the Majesty Queen. It's just passed on the 8th of September. And then over here we've got information for the community. So you can see the south door behind us. Now we're going to just pan around. And we're still in the aisle, but you can see that little doorway there. That's actually for the rood stairs. Now inside there are 7 lower steps remain from the 15th or 16th centuries. And you can see them there. And if you look, there's a lot of stonework inside. And this comes from the original rood screen. Isn't that amazing? If we pan around, you can see just how much damage is done to this church on these window shells or boards. Now the window in front of us is called Christ is a Risen Christ. It's by A.K. Wilkinson, and the upper lights have 15th century glass. You can just see that in the centre there. Now Archibald Keeley Nicholson designed over 700 windows. The Wilkinsons made glass between the 1890s and 1960s. His works are found in Lincoln and Norwich cathedrals. Well, it's beautiful, isn't it? Now, Archibald's brothers were Charles, who was a church architect, and Sidney, who would become the founder of the Royal School of Church Music. And it was for the commemoration of the 600th anniversary for the dedication of this church, 1924. Now, something else that's most unusual, and I've got no information on it, is a glass floor protected. And it looks like there's some footprints from the past. I would imagine this was a lime screed, and the workmen of Basie. So now we're going to walk to the furthest end, the west end of the aisle. When you come in here, have a look at the graffiti that is on these columns. We'll talk about that in a bit. So this church has got a lot of sofas, so it's obviously a community-based church. But if we have a look over here, I want to show you this piece of graffiti here. So you can see the 1657 there quite clear. Now when I look this year up, Richard Cromwell, son of Oliver Cromwell, he was Lord Protector and he would disband Parliament in London. I believe he would end up going abroad to France. So the nave was built between 1324 and 1360. So on the grand scale, it's 66 feet by 24 feet. And if you look, you've got 5 bays on either side. The columns are semi-octagonal shafts. Now the roof has moulded main timbers, the tie beams are cambered, and at the feet are carved angels holding blank shields. So now we're actually in the north aisle, and this was built between 1324 and 1360. This is 11 feet wide. So on the floor you can see a 15th century chest. And against the north wall we've got the World War I memorial. And I read that the details, we have 2 postmen from here, from World War I. A wheelwright, a factory workers, a farm labourer, a clerk, unknown trades. Must have seemed different to the community when they never returned. I researched Butsbury's War Memorial. It's a very rewarding way you can learn so much about the people that are from that time in your area. Now against the north wall, it looks like it's been exposed some medieval writing. On the wall it says 16th century to the medieval painting. If we pan around, we have some very old stoneworks from the original rood screen stone. Now we're right into the corner of the north aisle. We've got a font here which I've got no details on. And in the corner, another antiquity. If we pan around, it's the most unusual stonework or plasterwork. You can just about make it out. Now we're facing the chancel, and this measures 47 feet by 24 feet, and it's 14th century. And we are looking at Stebbing's trump card. It's a magnificent and incredibly rare stone rood screen. It's one of only 3 in existence in Europe. We've got Great Bardfield has one, Trondheim Cathedral in Norway has one, and the one here. Now it's built in the 14th century and it fills the chancel arch. It consists of 3 small arches and the statues are missing. Now, Great Bardfield screen is complete along with its statues. So I would say the same craftsman built both screens. Now, in 1884, this screen was restored and the damaged sections are on display, as we've already seen. Now, a wooden rood screen was built here, also in the 15th century, and you can still see the now blocked doorway. Now we're looking at an 1892 organ, pipe organ. What's really nice and quite unusual with this church is that everything's got a label on it from what century, which is quite handy. We've got a very small doorway, I guess, to the vestry. And some other openings there that are blocked up. It really is a massive church. And yet again, I noticed another ancient stone just by the organ. Got some most exquisite communion rails. And again, I was able to tell it's 1700 because there's a sticker on the wall. How many people have opened that? We can zoom in. We're now at the high altar. And I noticed in the east window, a very plain window, but right in the middle, something from the past. Now we've got a fine bit of oak carving. I guess this would be local craftsmen. Now right in the corner we've got a credence table, and I had no idea what this was. It's made from the original rood screen. It's to celebrate Holy Communion or the Last Supper. Notice the figure in the centre. This figure seems to be going down, so you'd be looking up if this was in the air. And there's another figure here. Against the south wall we've got a sedilia, which is 14th century. It's most likely built by the same craftsman who built the rood screen. Now, if you look at this small block, it's actually called a Lenten veil. And Lent is a time of fasting, and church wardens would cover up all the crosses and relics of saints with a veil. It's first mentioned in 1010 in Rome. Still goes back, way back to the Old Testament, where a veil covered up the tabernacle of the desert, according to St. Paul. It's incredibly rare. Now, this small wooden block and the wheels inside would have pulled up a Lenten veil, which is a ceremony. It must have been from 1460. Now, the font I found out is 14th century. It's believed to the font was encased. This may account for why the faces of the font bowl being plain and in perfect condition. Now, in the year 2000, it was moved from the south door to its present position. Now we're facing the west tower, and you can see the original arch there. Now, if we look at this column here, it's got some amazing graffiti on it. So for the Earls of Essex and Oxford, the Earl's home was at Castle Hedingham in Essex. It's believed that William Butcher married Elizabeth Vere in 1458 in Great Topham near Malden, and these carvings are connected to the marriage. William Butcher would die in the Battle of Barnet in 1471. In the War of the Roses, historians regard this as one of the most decisive of battles. Now, I wonder who actually carved this in 1471. If we have a closer look, you can see the two family crests. So we have the star, which I'm not sure which one it is, but you can clearly see in the centre here the knot and the star entwined. So now we should leave this old church and have a quick walk around the grounds. So you can see a great amount of alteration has taken place. Incredibly big church. Must have showed the wealth here at one time. Quite unusual for a church. It's got a massive drip tray running all the way around its perimeter. You can see in front one of the old accesses for the village. See a beautiful house there, look at that. This would be Tudor. Wow, you can see all the different periods of brickwork. This church has seen a lot of work and renovations over the centuries. It's just amazing. This must be the vestry. And this looks quite recent, so it just shows us are keeping the skills up. Look at the scale of this place. There's just so many alterations. I can tell you that this church has got 6 or 7 bells, but I could find no details apart from that. Looks like the downpipes become disconnected. And in the church grounds I found one small yew tree. Got no idea. So today St Mary the Virgin of Stebbing carries out baptisms, weddings and funerals, and is very active within the community. So I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you very much.